please, can you run us through the project tracker?
Sure. And I just want to say good afternoon and thank you all for joining today. We do have the Christmas parade, so I appreciate the chair for keeping us on schedule here. The projects are all up to date. I'll take any questions if you have any, but just so you all know, we are finished officially with the well at 114 East Parker. The tenants, so the tenants are starting their move-in and giving tours for their clients. We will have a grand opening, so expect that in January at the end of the month.
Great. All right, wonderful. So next, any additional housekeeping items?
No, sir.
Okay. All right. Move on to action items and old business. We have the minutes from the November 4th meeting. Everyone had a chance to review those? I'll hear a motion to accept the minutes.
I move to accept the minutes.
Second. All right, so moved. Any objection? Unseen? All right, so let's get to our first new business item. This is Mary's Bagel Cafe.
And so one of the representatives from Mary's Bagels intends to attend, and so we'd like to shuffle around a little bit, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, and start with the Vanguard Room.
That's perfect.
Okay. And so Ayana and myself will be presenting this. I'll start us out, and then representatives from the Vanguard Room are here. Matt's in the audience if you all have any questions of him. But just for background information, Vanguard Room is a recording studio. It's located in the Dixieland CRA. They've been located there for about 20 years now. They operate in about 1,800 square feet of space at 1037 South Florida Avenue. They intend to expand to occupy another 2,000 square feet to add studios to their existing footprint, which would take up a portion of a storefront fronting Florida Avenue. In September of 2019, we actually presented this to the advisory board. So they did have a previous grant approval, a total of $90,000 towards interior renovation with some additional facade work planned. However, with COVID, time lapsed, and they had to reevaluate their project. And so going back 2 years, we do have some stipulations that if permits are not pulled within a certain amount of time, that we can offer extensions. We did go through that extension period for their group. We've exhausted that, and then there's also been a change in scope. So with that, they planned about $225,000 previously in renovation costs. However, that has been revised down, and so with that, we would like to revise their ask. And so, again, the previous project, cost was about $225,000, and those included just electrical work, some HVAC, ADA compliance, and then again those facade improvements which will come out. And then Ayana will cover what's happening today going forward.
So Matt from the Vanguard Room recently submitted a proposal with a scope of work that totaled $136,000 approximately. The electrical improvements are estimated at $68,000, and they include insulation, electrical, HVAC, plumbing, and also, oh no, that's it. Those items fall under our infill adaptive reuse grant, and in comparison to the proposal that was presented in 2019, the current proposal has decreased about $88,000. So today, staff is recommending the approval of the infill adaptive reuse funds with reimbursement of up to $75,000 to complete their renovation, their project.
Any questions? All right. If we have no questions, I'll hear a motion.
So moved.
All right, so to approve. All right. Commissioner to approve. Terry seconded. All in favor? Say aye. Aye. All opposed? Nay. All right. Motion passes.
Take it back to Mary's Bagels. If you don't mind, I see Mr. Kendrick walked in.
Alrighty, so we're going to talk about Mary's Bagel Cafe. This project originally came before the board back in the beginning of this year. The project, or the site, is located on the southwest corner of the 98 North and West 8th Street intersection. It's located just west of the hospital and just north of the CRA-owned property at 103 West 7th Street, which is currently in the development negotiation phase. In September of 2019, this project was awarded design assistance in the amount of $1,500. The project qualified administratively for up to $75,000 under the infield adaptive reuse grant, and in January, the board approved an additional $15,000, as well as the planning, design, and construction of the alley improvements, the contribution of $17,000 for the drive aisle from the alley to 8th Street, as well as the future construction of a drive aisle from 7th Street to the alley, which would also serve as a secondary ingress to the cafe site. So as it stands, the CRA's total contribution to date, or planned contribution, is just over $181,000. So while conducting their due diligence, the applicant encountered a perched water table, which is requiring them to increase the site elevation to accommodate a 8,100 gallon underground stormwater system. And this is going to be located under the parking lot. And as you can see, this unexpected modification is resulting in a substantial project budget increase. So you will see over here on the left, it has the original project budget, which was presented at the time the board approved. That budget was right at about $704,000. And the budget has increased to $956,203. On the table at the bottom, you'll see that the highlighted items are the items that have been added to the budget, and all of those items are related to the installation of that stormwater system. So you'll see here is kind of a site layout of how that stormwater system will be laid out under the parking lot. And this is increasing the total budget by $206,272.42. The applicant is requesting that the CRA assist with 40% of that increase, which comes up to the $82,508.97. So while staff was reviewing the application's request, we took a look at the CRA's project contributions over the last 4 years. We realized that this is going to be slightly higher than the normal 20% that we try to award for the grants over what staff can approve administratively. The reason that staff is in support of this request is that we had several discussions during last year's board retreat where we recognized that we needed to reevaluate how we incentivize projects along this corridor. And so we acknowledge that we will need to over-incentivize some of the projects. Historically, we over-incentivize projects or the first projects in an area, and then we typically try to back off as subsequent projects come along. And you'll see that the Robinson Cowles project was heavily over-incentivized as it was the first project along this corridor. And so then you'll see that now with this additional funds, that will put us right at about 29% of the total budget. Staff recommends approval of the additional infill adaptive reuse funds in the amount of $82,508.97, with the funding disbursement parameters remaining in place. And I'll answer any questions that you may have.
Questions?
I just have one, not so much with the project, but the surrounding area, if they had to do that much work for stormwater, what's the impact for the city, for the surrounding areas? Is there a problem in the adjacent areas for stormwater runoff? Or has it been looked at?
You take it back a little, let's take it back. So I'll go back to the aerial image here. There are inlets for stormwater here. The challenge is the depth of the lots and the size of the properties along the corridor. And so while these all used to be zoned for residential use, and so it used to be single-family houses that sit on these lots, well, you look at where we are today, and it's a commercial corridor, which takes up a lot more footprint within the property boundaries, but then also today's stormwater requirements that you be able to mitigate on site. And so with the size of the building, needing to develop the site out, it puts you in a situation where you have to figure out where to either retain that water on site so it can flow into the city system depending on the type of rain event you have. So in a roundabout way to answer the question, it's a stormwater issue that if any development will have on this corridor, particularly with where the water table sits in the area. And so, Mr. Kendrick, as the project, the firm that's doing this project with respect to his efforts, he's gone back and really looked at all the ways that he can meet the requirements here and for us to have a viable project. So I can tell you that we will likely have the same issue when we develop our property to the south. And so, unfortunately, he's just got the experience of designing and trying to build this thing first before we get to it.
But for any other projects along that corridor, you're going to have basically the same issue. Yeah, sure.
And we own the lot beside it.
Right next door.
Yeah.
And that cost is not including fixing that because it's not been developed yet.
Correct, it is not. And so at some point, when we enter into our development agreement with the medical firm that intends to build an office there, run into the same issues. And we may have to incentivize them to continue on in the project. Ideally, we won't have to, but they'll have the same challenge.
Would there be an opportunity to combine the efforts since the land is adjoining there, so that they're not, each done in isolation?
You and I think alike. I can tell you that I throw it out there and I try to tie it all together and make it a caveat. Unfortunately, we're unable to do that.
It really seems like maybe a city issue that would need to be addressed. If you just keep patchworking it down the line, it's just more funds rather than trying to look at it from a big picture and doing a head start on it. But just a thought.
So I'm going to take note to talk to our public works team to see if there are any plans. I don't, off the top of my head, I don't recall there being any plans to rebuild any cross sections of this corridor. But some of what I think you're expressing concern about is retention. And there are no retention ponds in this area. And there's really nowhere to put them in this area, which is part of the challenge. And so I think it would take an overall review of the general area to figure out where the water's going.
Yeah, I think just incentivizing the development of that area if we're going to keep bumping up against the same challenges from a cost standpoint of retention, that it would make sense to look at it on a broader scale. I don't know what the land use is, how deep from Florida Avenue commercial type of use would extend, but there are opportunities along the corridor where there's existing underutilized spaces that could possibly serve in that function, or to either accept off-site water if there's a larger project, or just to incentivize future developments along that corridor that would have a larger footprint to work with, where they could accommodate on-site more readily. Because I know when you have a really tight site like this and you have to provide retention, it's a challenge.
Yeah, I think it's worth a conversation with the Public Works and our Lakes and Stormwater team to talk it through, to see if that's possible.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, thank you, Chrisanne. It was helpful to see the chart of percentages of CRA investment, and one of the questions I asked Elise this morning was to differentiate between downtown CRA and midtown, because we have a project coming up where we're talking 10% has been sort of the standard, and so I thought that was helpful what you shared, and would just ask you to share that with the group, how we're looking at that, this project versus some of the ones in the downtown CRA.
Sure. And so I think when Ariel touched on it a little bit, he was talking about how we incentivize the corridors, where Midtown, it's a larger area and it's a greater area of need. And our budget in Midtown we're $5 million for Midtown for funding, where you look at downtown, we've only got about $1.8 million for our budget. And the redevelopment is happening at a rapid pace in downtown. And so in an area like North Florida, along Memorial Boulevard, in Midtown CRA, we have over-incentivized these projects to try to stimulate those areas where it's not ideal for businesses to relocate. And so when you look at Memorial Boulevard, where we started with Tapatios, well, then we got another project on Memorial Boulevard, Coney Funeral Home. Mr. Kendrick worked on that project as well. I can tell you that throughout that project, they had some concerns about their budget and being able to finish on that. But we had gotten into the project, permits were pulled, they were already under construction, and so we didn't entertain a reevaluation of the award on that project. And that's something that we've stuck to as a group as well, is that it's part of the grant guidelines that once you receive an award and you commit your project, you don't come back and you're not allowed to do so for a 5-year period, and that's across all 3 districts. So this does keep us within those parameters, and we're incentivizing in an area where we want to see some development take place, and we're actually incentivizing at a percentage that is less than the previous project, which is 2 doors down for the Robinson House project. Sure.
So a note I'd like everyone to keep in mind as well is when we're looking at these projects, the more we can have our investments have the physical proximity, close proximity to each other, it's a multiplier effect. I think I was talking to Elise about this. I spent some time over the last few weeks driving by some of our projects that have been completed, and I went around Lincoln Square a few times, and you'll notice that now there's been more improvements, like by private property owners and investments by those surrounding that project. And it's true broadly for all of our projects. So if we can keep this stuff together, it makes a lot of sense to be a little bit more aggressive in how we're funding, because it is a stabilizer for these pockets, and it can have tremendous effect, tremendously beneficial effect for the immediate properties. So just something to keep in mind, especially something like this. It's been an area that's been in need of redevelopment for a long time. These are great projects to have go on board. So it's a great success story too. Oh yeah.
Mary's Bagel, is that a a new business, or is it a franchise, or
You've been working with Denise, and you want to give the background on it?
I see what I can remember. Essentially, so Denise actually grew up in her parents' home or grandparents' home on this lot. And she inherited this property from her grandparents. She worked for, I don't remember exact number of years, but across the street at the hospital. And as side jobs, she's also done, was it buns and cinnamon buns, or it's a cinnamon bun company. And yes, these gourmet treats. Is that in my memo? I can just read it instead of trying to remember. Okay, hold on. Let's see. Yes, so she operated these gourmet treats, which is a cinnamon bun business, as well as a wedding and event planning business. And so she always wanted to kind of, one, give back to the community, but then also utilize that property and give tribute to her grandmother. And so Mary is the name of her grandmother, so she's building the cafe there. And her intent is to serve the hospital. Yeah.
All right. Any further questions? Any further discussion? I'll hear a motion.
motion to approve?
All right, Teresa, move to approve.
Second.
Chris Hamilton, second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion passes.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you also, Master. Thank you. We don't want to leave too quick. We don't want to be nosy either, so thank you so much.
Good to see you. All right. Let's go to item number 3 on our agenda. 238 North Massachusetts Avenue, Grammar Plus.
Yes. Right, so 238 North Massachusetts Avenue is better known as the Gore Building. West Point One acquired this building this year at $4 million. And there are several uses, or prior uses to the space, but it's sat largely vacant for, I would say, close to a decade now. You see the old restored, I think the signage that they've kind of unearthed there with Monarch Grocery on it. It's from the 1930s. But the ownership group acquired the space with the intent to renovate the building to accommodate and relocate their own office, which will be part of a mixed-use development that has, we're talking about a potential food, grocer or cafe, but then also some private suites up on the second floor there. There'll also be outdoor seating that fronts on Bay Street. And so I'll share with you all that, a couple of years ago, we did a catalyst plan for North Massachusetts Avenue, and this is identified as a key site. So if you look at site number 3 here, we're talking about the Gore Building right here on the corner of Bay Street, so then Meriton sits just here. And then we've got some development projects that we'd like to see done at 1 and 2, and then the Summit here is complete. So the developer is planning improvements that include installation of an elevator to gain access to the second floor, renovations again on the first floor, which will accommodate two to three users potentially. And this project is eligible for downtown grants that are we have an EDGE grant, which would serve the restaurant uses, and then infill adaptive reuse that is solely applicable to the second floor uses. So they would max out at about $55,000. Okay? Their project is extensive. They're looking at $3.1 million for this renovation. So within your agenda package, those expenses are broken out. I chose to focus in on the items that are typically reimbursable on the infill grant, which are the sprinklers at $61.5, and then the electrical work at close to $360,000. The HVAC work, approximately $147,000. Plumbing, replumb at $212,000. So total of those eligible expenses, about $863,000. The tenants have been, I would say the applicants have been very gracious in working with us, and they've had to do an extensive demolition just to get understanding what the true cost of this project will be. And so we're excited to see this thing go forward at a schedule to get it done by fall of 2022. With that, staff is looking for support of this project to get us to this, ideally. And you see that outdoor seating, again, is under roof. So it should be great for summer as well. We'll sustain through the rainy months too. But staff is seeking support on this project to approve an infill adaptive reuse grant with a reimbursement of up to $313,000 to complete the renovation, which is 10% of the overall project. And that is aligned with what we've done in the downtown CRA previous projects with Petcoff's recent acquisition near Black and Brew, but then also for our game room downtown as well, the rec room. Okay. So those are all aligned. All right. Steph, any questions?
I don't have a lot of knowledge. I just hear the elevators are extremely expensive. And I don't know that 82,000 sounds like the right number. Is that chance that there's going to be additional expenses that would, because you said earlier that they can't come back once the grant has been awarded. Now, if the expenses were to change, if they were to find something in the building when they got started, what would the protocol be there for them to increase?
So a little bit different for this award because they've already done demo. So with renovation, typically you demo down to the studs to your bare bones to get a sense of what your true cost will be. So they've got, I would say, a better true value of what the renovation will be. I will say there are always unknowns, especially when you start saw cutting floors and things like that when you have to. But for the most part, they have a truer cost than someone who's just walking in and giving a bare eye estimate. Also, with the new construction project we just discussed, is getting into the site planning and site design work is what causes that change or that cost increase. So in this case, could they have additional expenses? Absolutely. I think one key factor here for us is we've been having some discussions with potential tenants to come in and occupy this space. And we really want a bodega or a grocer downtown. And so I understand that, the team really needs to go forward because they've got a timeline in which they'd like to open up their office and be occupied. And so there are some lending funds that are also attached to that. And we want to help them keep their timeline. But then the potential tenant still needs to work through the nuances of jumping into this construction timeline to keep up so that we can potentially get our bodega and or just make sure it's a compatible user that comes in along with them. So it'd be great if we could, provide this award with some additional funds as a caveat if we could get that user to the table to get ourselves a bodega, if that's something that would be up for consideration. That way, that tenant, when they come in, they can reap the benefits of the additional funds that they would not otherwise have to finish out their build-out.
And that's similar with Petcoff downtown. They didn't have the exact hard cost, and there's a little bit of that wiggle room there, but is that something we can, like you're saying, we can do here?
Correct. Same wiggle room that we gave Mr. Petcoff. So it's a grant up to a certain amount. So at this point, we know that West Point One, they need the 313 is the base number. If there was an additional 5%, if we could get a bodega user on a build out, I think that'd be a win-win for us all downtown. But I don't want to speak for Greg on what they would be willing to do because I know he's got a project, a timeline, and wants to finish up. So
Share a few words just about it. Sure. Yeah. Would you be willing just to?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Chad. So we would be very open to that. We'd love to have a bodega down there, and Elise very articulately said that we kind of have to keep the project rolling as we talk to people, and we've had several people talk to us about being down there, but, Mark markets and cafes come with a lot of refrigeration and gear and stuff, and a lot of those people don't have the money to put into it. And so we'd be very open to trying to accommodate the right fits in there. So, you know, our offices are going to be on the other half of this building. We'd like it to be the right for downtown and solve all those things. So it would be an ideal scenario for us if we could establish that base and then have some money should we find the right tenant that we're all looking for, being the market bodega, to go in there. Does that help?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, just to hear the vision and at least, I guess, a question of can we approve this as recommended, and then if there is a tenant who's a grocer who comes in, can they come back for discussion of what can we do, or do we need to build that into it at this step?
Yeah, so I think you can approve the base 10%, which is what they've asked for at 313, with the flexibility of allowing us to increase the grant award 5% on the number that they have here, which would be another $150,000. So effectively saying on the 3.1 million, right? So then we go from 10% to 15%, provided we are able to secure a bodega as a tenant upon staff review and approval. I know that's a lot of that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
But
The idea, though, would be that they could be negotiating with somebody and would have some assurance that there would be an incentive of up to that 5% level without having to go through going to another meeting, like a staff approval, basically. After we approve something today, then you wouldn't have to come back to us for that unless it was something beyond that amount.
yeah, we make it administrative because we don't want them to have to come back because of course it would be outside of the parameters of what we typically do. And so to keep in line with that, it would be ideally that we get the ability to do that administratively with the specific use that we're trying to see here in our downtown, and understanding that the funds are going towards the build out for that use specifically.
And just clarify, our downtown fund, we have, on this report showing 865,000 and change.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that's taken into account encumbrances as a true available amount?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's great. And Brian, I'm sure you can attest, you have some of that built-in equipment that is needed in that aspect. It's very enticing and very helpful for somebody to try to start a business like that to come in downtown, to have some of those items that they're not attractive items that you want to spend a lot of money on, but that if they're there, that is a huge, huge help.
It just seems like it would be a step toward marketing it, to getting it to what we want. Like, are we able to stipulate that it does have to be the bodega type of environment? Not necessarily like anybody gets, whatever they want and then they come in and.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can stipulate that, and I think that with respect to the current development team, their understanding is that you either take the base amount of 10% or you're eligible for up to 15% if you pull in that user for the specific purpose of that build out.
Any further discussion?
Just a quick thought.
Yes, sir.
Since we're looking at multiple use of that building as a whole. Have we ever dealt with, say, a sub partner in addition to the primary? Say if the bodega people came and said, yeah, we want this space, but say maybe they need beyond the 5%. And they're asking outside the major property owner. Have we ever had anything like that, or could we address something like that? So since we're looking at that as kind of a priority anyway.
And that's the reason why I think we're pushing the discussion today, is because the way the grant guidelines are written, it's the tenant, property owner, because the tenants, in order to apply for a grant, they have to get the property owner's approval to do so, with the understanding that they'll be on the hook for completing the work. Well, if restricted in that way to say the property owner and tenants, this specific location is prohibited from receiving any additional grant funding for a 5-year period once you receive a grant award, grant funding. And so once that thing kicks off and it commences, they've already pulled permits, they're ready to go. Once this award happens, we won't entertain offers from any of the other tenants to renovate out that space or any other requests. So it's good that the discourse is happening today.
So is it good question? Restricted to the full property or this space?
So the $313,000 is for overall renovation of the building towards the expenditures that they've shown here. So that's the 10%. 5%, we're looking for that increase to go specifically towards a use that we're specifying here, which would be a small grocer or bodega and the associated building.
Or John Bon Jovi dream that I had.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a great approach. It's in keeping with the standard of downtown and around the area of the threshold of 10%, but it also allows the CRA to really try and incentivize a downtown grocer or something we don't have that I think as a CRA, as a commission, we would love to see. And so there's that additional 5%, a little bit more than 10% if we can get this specific use. If not, there's still the 10% award, and it's an exciting project either way, but then just kind of fingers crossed and hoping we could see that grocer come into that space. So I fully support it.
I do also like that we're equipping the developer to do the legwork here. You know, like they're the ones going out and finding the tenant. We're setting up the structure to get what we'd love to see happen. But it's a partnership here where the developer can have a little bit extra juice so they go and do the work. All right. Any further questions, comments? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion. Motion to approve. Motions to approve. Second. Yes.
Since we're amending it.
Please do.
So just, if I could clarify, Terry, you can correct me. So what your motion was to approve the $313,000 that staff is recommending, and include a clause that would increase the total grant an additional 5% of the project costs, provided that the developer finds a tenant that would be a grocer or bodega type business to occupy the available space. Yes. So all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Seeing none, motion passes. All right.
Get to work, Greg.
Behind you.
Item number 4 under new business, bid number 1266, contract award.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. So this, the award of this bid, contract 1266, is actually associated with our debt Meriton within the agreement with Framework Group. As part of the acquisition and redevelopment agreement with the 10 acres, which is the pointer is dead now, so I can't use it, but just to the top of the screen. So the red line is where the substation is located, the frontage there, and then the Meriton is now just on the top of the screen there to the north of that. But we've got a clause within that agreement with Framework Group that requires the CRA to screen the electric substation to improve the corridor aesthetics. And part of the challenge with the street is that it doesn't really look like it's a part of the neighborhood. So we've got great apartments on the north side there. A lot of the streetscape along that side of the street has been rebuilt. And so this is the first step for us in recapturing the south side of the block where the police station spans from Massachusetts all the way down to the underpass that takes us into the neighborhood. Is really screening the substation, and then ultimately we will rebuild the streetscape on that side of the block to interconnect it with the rest of downtown, and also improve the drainage along this block. And so it's a sequence, a phase of projects here. And so with the screening, the substation screening wall, we had to issue an invitation to bid. We had issued the invitation to bid in late August for the construction of the wall, which will be a masonry block wall. It'll be an articulating wall, 8 to 10 feet in height in front of the substation, the stucco finish. We received 5 bids on this, the scope of work, and it was ranked as follows here, with Waller Construction being first, Miller Construction being second, Regents Facility Services being third, Ovation Construction, and then Framework Construction being ranked fifth. And so they were all deemed responsive, but Waller Construction was deemed the most responsive with the lowest bid, just under $250,000. We didn't receive any protest after we issued the notice to award this contract. So what we'd like to do is to be able to take this agreement to the city commission at the next meeting to move this forward. The construction, we understand, will be approximately 120 days to get it done once we issue a notice to proceed. Again, staff is looking for support that the board would recommend approval on this thing so we can go forward to city commission with a contract.
Okay, any discussion?
With construction costs always going up,
Sure.
the quote that they give us, is it in the contract like it can't go up, or with supplies it probably will?
So as of now, it is fixed. Once we receive a bid, there's stipulations in there about the time in which they have to hold the pricing. We ended up extending the bid time for an additional 30 days because the contractors asked us to give them more time. So when you look at the timing there, we issued it in August, but we actually didn't close it out until the end of October because they were able to price out their products a little bit better at the time. So with that, I think that the submittals are closer to October than they are to August. That helps. And so I think we're locked in now. We've got a little bit of time. We do have to make a decision and get it out of the ground here rather quickly.
That makes me wonder, since this is the first time we've had this kind of discussion, how would change orders be managed or handled? Who would handle the costs of those if it did go above budget?
Yeah, so good question about internal controls. Change orders, it depends on the amount of the change order. If it's 10% or more, it's considered a significant change order. All those get routed through our city manager's office. So we do have some additional reviews that need to take place depending on the amount of the change order.
Were there any differences in terms of design? The cost difference seems like it's so much less than the others.
And to be, the clarity on it for me is when I look through the bids and I see who the contractors assigned to the work. And so typically when a contractor submits a bid, they put in the cost per hour for the trades that need to be on a project. And so you'll see stucco, which is a component of this work. They put in the price of that stucco contractor. There's a price for the contractor laying the foundations or the footers. There's a price for the contractor that's doing the block. Well, each vendor that submits their proposal, they have to identify the different classes of labor. Unfortunately, some firms that submit, and I'll just use this as an example and say if my hourly wage is $100 an hour and my staff's hourly wage is $75 an hour, well, some companies bill for their $100 an hour wage in their proposal instead of their staff's $75 an hour wage, and that oftentimes will completely skew the bids themselves. And so in this case, I can tell you that one of the firms had their principal of the actual construction company as someone who would be working on the project, when clearly you know that that person will never likely step foot on site. And so the other companies understand that, hey, I've got my work team, the workers will go out and do this work, and so I'll bill for the labor appropriately. And they understand that they have to do that to get a contract. So sometimes folks just throw it together and they put it out there to see if it'll stick. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't.
All right. Any further questions? Seeing none, is there a motion?
No motion.
EJ moves to approve. Is there a second? Christie?
Terry got it.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nay? Motion passes.
We have one more item here, and it is the acquisition of property at 215 East Parker Street. Last month, we had the discussion about 210 East Parker. We ended up going forward with that acquisition. Just so you all know, we did close on that property on the 22nd, just before the holiday, and so we are officially the owners of that one. We've got one more on the block, and so just looking at the work that we've done, it's the same slides, because I want to show you all the good stuff we've done in the neighborhood with the other projects, and where we're headed when we talk about the context of what we like to see in the district. And we have to get there, and we've got one more acquisition to make. And so this is the area plan. And when you look at, when you look at the acquisition, here is the one we just bought last week. So 215 East Parker Street is this corner clip here. And then we'll officially own the entire block if you all approve for us to go forward today. Property is vacant. There's no structure on the property, about 6,300 square feet. It has an assessed value of $15,246. In July, we did appraise this property at $30,000. Now, the contract that we've entered into, or we've signed in order to go forward, is $35,000 price of the property, so it's not too far beyond the actual appraised value. There's a $3,000 assignment fee because we are going through a third party that has been gracious enough to do this for us and go down to South Florida and get signatures on this contract from the property owner. We've made several attempts at this as well. Staff has actually sent out mailers to the property owner recently to try to get them to follow up and contact us, with no response. So we were pleased to hear that someone else was able to get them to the table on this one. We do have the acquisition policy in place that I went through with you last month. Just to reiterate that we do have a resolution that allows for us to acquire property, for you all to do so as a board, understanding that it'll support the implementation of a redevelopment plan. This is in Midtown. It is an area in which we focused heavily on. And some of the factors, the purchase price, the availability of funding, which we do have, the location of the property, which is squarely the center of redevelopment activity that we have, the purpose for purchasing the property, and then any other additional factors. And so I've shared the terms with you. We would be paying the closing costs on this with a closing date of December 22nd if the board approves for us to finalize the acquisition on this with guidance from our city attorney and Putnam, Creighton, and Ed would be our closing agent. Stand for any questions.
It says, providing the title is clear. Do you not know the title is clear yet, or?
So we're still doing some title work on it because there are two owners. So got some family members at the table here. We just want to make sure all is well. No inheritances or things like that that have taken place over the years.
Any other questions? Any comments? All right, I'll hear a motion. Motion to approve. Commissioner McLeod, Brown, second. Very good. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? All right, motion passes.
We got like 17 emails from Elise yesterday.
may address the board, Mr. Chair. So the purpose for all the emails, the meetings for the upcoming year, sending all those out separately because we have historically had one single invitation for all the meetings, which makes it very difficult to take people off, to add people to sessions, to invite others into the meeting. So I wanted to make sure that each individual meeting has its own invitation so that specifically that invitation will get canceled and not all of them at once, which sometimes confuses folks on the other end too when we have cancellations. So I would appreciate it if you accept all those individual monthly invitations so we can be ready to go for the new year. I also want to say thank you all for your service. You know, this is the last meeting of 2021. I think we've had a great year as a group, as an organization, and I think 2022 is going to be that much better. So our first meeting is January 6, 2022. I hope to have a development agreement for Oak Street for discussion before you at that time.
Exciting. The new year.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all. I do again want to give kudos to Elise and the staff. I got to have my monthly powwow with Elise earlier this week, and the phrase under budget and ahead of schedule came up a couple times, which is just amazing. So, you know, kudos big time to all of you. We appreciate your hard work.
Thank you.
Good job.
And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you. See you.